Hello everyone. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. It has been a while since I last uploaded. My last upload was about 6 weeks ago, and it was when I showed you my live pregnancy test. I say it was live, obviously it wasn't live at the time, but it was, I was filming it happening live. Pregnancy test, which obviously showed that my third cycle of IVF finally worked, and I am currently 15 weeks pregnant, which is wild. I have tried to film this video so many times. I've either not been happy with it, or I just haven't been feeling great while filming, and it just showed in the video. So I've decided that I'm just going to film it all again. Obviously, I am very aware that my content going forward is not necessarily going to be for everyone now. I really understand how it feels to be on the other side, and now I have kind of crossed that bridge. I don't expect everybody to just be completely on board and be really happy for me and stick around forever. So I completely understand if my content going forward isn't for you. However, what I did really want to do was sit down and have a bit of a discussion about the IVF cycle. Obviously I vlogged it the whole way through. It was delayed. I was initially uploading maybe 2 weeks behind, but by the end of it, it was about 5 weeks behind. Maybe not quite 5, maybe more, about 4. But I was uploading it delayed to kind of give us time to process everything that was going on. I'll be really honest, we really didn't think it was going to work. Really didn't think it was going to work at all. If you saw my 2-week wait video, you will see that I was really adamant that it hadn't worked, and it was so similar. The 2-week wait was so similar to my previous cycle that I was just 100% certain that it hadn't worked. So it was very surreal finding out that it had worked. I am going to do a video kind of doing a Q&A for like the first trimester and things like that. Obviously I am into the second now. But one thing I've been saying that I was going to do over and over and over again was do a Q&A about the actual IVF cycle. So here we are. I got so many questions through. I always hate saying that because it makes me feel like I'm going, oh, look at me, I got so many questions. But I really did. So I have kind of screenshotted them all, and I'm going to go through, and I'm not going to be able to answer every single one of them, but I will answer like the most common ones. To give you a bit of a recap, because some of the questions I think were obviously from people who haven't been around the whole time, which is absolutely fine, but some of the questions were kind of asking, you know, which cycle was this, and what I was doing, etc. So just a quick recap for anybody who is new here or wasn't around for the whole time. My husband and I were trying to conceive for 7 years, which is just wild when I think about it. We actually started this cycle of IVF on quite literally our 7-year anniversary of trying to conceive. So yeah, we were trying to conceive for 7 years. I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome. I was also diagnosed with 2 fully blocked fallopian tubes. I had my fallopian tubes removed, as we were told that IVF was the only way that I could conceive. So I made the decision to have my tubes removed. Following on from that, we did a fresh cycle of IVF, which was horrific. Every single cycle that I've done has been vlogged, so you can go back and watch the videos for the full ins and outs. But our first cycle didn't even make it to transfer. We then went ahead with the second transfer. A second cycle, sorry, where we again had really poor embryo quality, and we managed to get one very poor quality embryo to day 5, which wasn't at day 5. It should have been a blastocyst by that point, but it wasn't quite there. But we had it transferred anyway. It obviously didn't work. We then had quite a break. It was meant to be like a year's break, year to 18 months. Ended up being just a bit over that. We had planned on going to Greece. We then found out after a campaign that I had led called Fight for IVF that the NHS where I lived were reinstating IVF on the NHS. So we found out that we actually qualified. So we didn't have to go to Greece, and we managed to have our third and final cycle on the NHS at home, which we were really glad about, and we are incredibly grateful for, because it was just so expensive. But in in those 18 months, we did a lot of further tests, which found out that I had an infection. On top of that, Marco, my husband, also had really high DNA fragmentation. So our embryo quality was just always going to be pretty bad. And even if they did create embryos, the chances of them developing into a healthy pregnancy were quite slim. So it was quite a difficult time. We had a lot thrown at us in that time. And then we had this cycle, which obviously went incredibly well. And if you haven't seen the vlogs that I did through that, we ended up with the most eggs we've ever got, the most fertilized that we've ever got, and the best quality that we've ever got. And they kind of just continued through. And for the first time ever, we had a good quality embryo transferred, and we also managed to have some in the freezer. We had never managed to get any embryos in the freezer, so we were over the moon about that. And to be honest, our goal for this cycle was frozen embryos, for a potential frozen embryo transfer. The thought of it actually working, like I said, was so beyond us, and we really didn't believe that that was going to happen. So that's kind of us in a bit of a nutshell, and how we got to this point. Like I said, every cycle has been vlogged. I have so many videos relating to our cycles that you can go back and watch. You will see my ever-changing hair colour and everything else throughout those videos. Some of them are good, some of them questionable, but they're there for you to watch. So obviously, if you do want to completely catch up with our story, then do go back and have a watch. But I hope you're comfy. I will try and not make this video the longest video in the world, but like I say, there are a lot of questions to get through. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope that I can answer all your questions as best as I possibly can. I did put something out on Instagram because some of the questions were quite specific in terms of like medical advice of what you should do, and I can't answer questions like that. I have no medical history whatsoever in terms of a medical background. It is not what I do for a line of work at all, so I can't answer questions like that. But I have, like I say, got all the questions ready. So yeah, get yourself comfy and we'll crack on. Okay, so the first question that I got was about my progesterone, and the question was, what is your progesterone support? So I was on progesterone from egg collection right through to around week 14 of the pregnancy. However, like I say, I started them on egg collection. I was on it throughout the whole of the 2-week wait. My clinic were quite hot on progesterone, and I think because of our history as well, they were very keen for me to be on as much as possible. So I was on basically all the tablets I was on after egg collection. I was on Progesterone, and I took 2 of those 3 times a day. I was on Prognova, and I took 1 of those 3 times a day. I had a Crinone progesterone gel, so rather than doing pessaries, it was a vaginal gel, and I had to do that twice a day. And then I also had what was the injection called? Lentigest. It was called Lentigest, and I had to do that 3 times a week. So it wasn't a PIO shot, it wasn't progesterone in oil, but it was a progesterone injection, and that I had to do it in my bum 3 times a week, and that was horrible, and I hated it, and I bruised like a peach, and it didn't help that I was on blood thinners, so I continued to bruise like a peach the whole way through. But that, I believe, was all the progesterone that I was on. So it was quite a lot, it was quite hardcore. I had alarms going off left, right and centre, but I do believe that it had a lot to do with the reason that it worked. And so yeah, I was quite keen on when they said that they were putting me on all this progesterone. At first I was like, oh my god, that's a lot, but actually I was really quite happy with it. So yeah, that's the progesterone that I was on. So this question I was asked quite a lot, and have been asked a lot via DM or, you know, any other means, and that question is, what do you think you did differently this time that is the reason that it worked? I struggle with this question, and I'll be really honest, whenever people ask me, I always kind of give the same answer. I can't answer that question, and I can't tell you what it was that we did differently. I do think a lot of the time with IVF, it can just come down to luck. There's obviously a lot of science involved, but I have kind of boiled it down to it's either gonna work or it's not, and that's kind of how I had to deal with it. In terms of what we did differently, we literally did everything differently. There is not one thing bar the, bar the Cetrotide that was the same about this cycle. We had obviously done all the testing that we had done beforehand. We had been on a huge sperm improvement protocol for my husband. We had been on countless supplements. I have done a video previously about what our supplement plan was. We saw a nutritionist, we changed clinics. We had spoken to numerous clinics beforehand about what our options were to decide what tests we needed and things like that. My protocol was completely different. It was different medication. It was a lot more hardcore. My doses were a lot higher. Like I said, the medication itself was completely different. I'm trying to think now. I had I had an endometrial scratch, which I'd not had before. And like I say, you know, it was a different clinic, different doctors, everything was different. My mindset was different the whole way through. As much as towards the end of the 2-week wait, I was a mess and believed it hadn't worked. Leading up to it and during, I was really positive and I just felt quite relaxed about it. So literally everything was different. There is no one thing that was the same. So I do find it really hard to say, yes, okay, I think this worked, or I think this made a difference. Like, a lot of people say to me about the endometrial scratch and whether or not I would recommend it and whether or not I think it made a difference. I don't know. Like, I couldn't go back into a IVF cycle now and do the exact same thing, and I would be anxious about stopping any of the things that I have done, whether that's the progesterone, whether or not that's the supplements we were on, the endometrial scratch, all of it. But because we changed so much rather than just 1 or 2 factors, I can't hand on heart say, I definitely think this made a difference, or I definitely think this made a difference. My medication definitely made a difference, because it did, like, obviously I responded a lot better, I had a lot more eggs, but I do think the DNA fragmentation work that we had done played a massive part in that, and I can't say that on a lower dose we wouldn't have had frosties. So it's really difficult for me to answer that question, but for us, I think the most important thing was the changing clinics, definitely. Most definitely the changing clinics. The DNA sperm improvement protocol that we did, we were under Dr. Jonathan Ramsey, who is a urologist, so he's a sperm expert, and I absolutely cannot recommend him enough. And I really think that if you have any sperm issues, that you should do a DNA fragmentation test just to rule it out. I think we paid £395, we did it through Fertility Solutions, and we had been told by 2 or 3 different clinics prior to that that it was pointless and that we shouldn't be doing it, and that because it was just the sperm morphology that we were showing issues with, it was very unlikely to be a DNA fragmentation, and yet his fragmentation was so high. So I really do recommend doing it. I think for £395, it's worth knowing and ruling out. And then obviously if there is something, Dr. Jonathan Ramsey is worth every penny. So yeah, so I can't really answer that question because I think there was so much, but I definitely think it's worth having a look into tests. And I think the way that we see it now is that we would rather we had spent all that money on tests to get the outcome that we've got, and to be able to go in with as much information as possible than just kind of do the standard, oh, we'll just go in and do it again, we'll just try again. Like, that testing was so worth it to me, but I can't say there was one definite factor that changed the outcome, because everything changed. So the next question is a question that I've got an awful lot, and is, what supplements did I use? So off the top of my head, I can't remember because there were so many, but we had seen a nutritionist and she had done a nutrition plan for us as well as a supplement plan, and we spent an awful lot of money on supplements. I have done a previous video which is based on my supplement plan, so I would watch that because that literally has every bit of information in there that you need, but I really don't recommend taking everything that I took without speaking to a specialist, because like I say, the supplements that I were on were based on my diagnosis and our history, so I think it's really, really important that you get that looked at first of all. Did you do acupuncture? No. So acupuncture was something I have been toying with throughout every single cycle, and I never did it. And the reason I never did it, in all honesty, is the cost alone. And I think, you know, on average, you're looking around £60 a session. I think I found anything from like 45 to 75. depending on where you go. But the people that were being recommended to me were a bit more expensive, but even so, I still found £45 a session quite steep, when obviously they're recommending that you go every week for at least 3 months before you start. So for me, I just kind of ruled it out, because I was a bit like, look, that's an extra cost that, to be quite frank, I didn't want to, nor could I afford to spend. So to me, I was just like, no, I didn't really believe it was going to make that much of a difference. I think some people really, really believe in it, and that's great. And I think if I'd have given it a go, then maybe I would have liked it. I do like certain holistic therapies. You know, I'm no stranger to reflexology or Reiki, and reflexology I used to get quite regularly, but acupuncture for me, I just didn't, I never took the plunge, I never went. So no is the answer to that. Do you have any tips to stop stressing after the embryo transfer? No. Yes and no. I think, like I say, if you've seen my 2-week wait video, you'll know that in the first few days I was cool as a cucumber, and then I just lost it, like completely lost it, because I believed it hadn't worked. But I think for me, I took the whole time off work. I took from my, was it my egg collection or my transfer? I think it was my egg collection. I don't know, but I took about 3 weeks off work. And for me, it was absolutely needed. I actually got signed off work because I just felt like I needed it. And for me, it was absolutely the best thing. Like, it made so much difference, because it allowed me that time to relax and kind of do what I wanted to do and keep myself busy, which for me is really important. Like, some people see work as a bit of a distraction and like to go to work and keep going to work to keep their mind off things, whereas my job for me isn't that. Like, it just isn't that. So I work from home, and Marco had just opened, or was about to just open the salon. So Marco was like not here at all during the day, and I was like completely on my own. And I knew that with work, that was just not, it wasn't going to distract me enough, because I was still within these 4 walls. So it gave me time to do whatever I wanted to do, whether or not that was like going out for walks every day, or reading my books, or literally anything, like binge watching Gilmore Girls, which I finally finished, by the way. Oh my god, definitely team Jess, FYI. But yeah, for me, it was really important that I could keep myself busy doing things that I wanted to do. And I think if that works for you, then I really think that it is the best option. And I made plans and made sure that I was busy the whole way through, so I didn't have time to kind of sit and ponder. Like the night before we tested, we went to a party. It was a friend's 40th, so we went to a party, and that was good, because otherwise we would have just been sat here like counting down the hours to the following morning. So it was nice to get out. So yeah, my advice personally is to keep yourself busy with things that you enjoy doing. But if you want to keep yourself busy at work or anything like that, then it's fine. There is no way that you are going to completely switch off from it. And I'm never going to sit here and say that if you do this, then you won't think about it and you'll cope absolutely fine, because I can't tell you that I cope with it absolutely fine, because I don't. And that 2-week wait is the hardest thing ever. And it's excruciating. So yeah, I think it's just about finding what works for you, but occupying yourself as much as you possibly can, doing things that you enjoy, doing things that relax you, and just make sure that you're really taking care of yourself. I think at that point, it's really important to remember that you have done everything that you can do, and it is out of your hands. You know, my dad actually really helped me throughout the 2-week wait, because I had really got into my head when there's only like a 30% chance that it's going to work, so it's probably not going to work. And that is kind of how my mind worked. And my dad came round and he was talking to me and all the rest of it, and he was like, he was being such a good support, and he kind of said to me, look, stop looking at it as a 30% chance. Like, scientifically, yes, okay, there's a 30% chance, but it's either worked or it's not. So look at it as a 50-50. And that did make me feel a lot better. And it won't for a lot of people, but to me, I was like, no, he's right. It's either worked or it's not. And at the moment, there's nothing to say that it's not worked. So try and just enjoy that, and try and just, you know, it's really easy for me to sit here and go, oh, try and just do this, try and just do this. And I know that some people will be watching this and think, oh, well, it's really easy for you to say that now. But like, please do remember that, you know, this wasn't my first rodeo. I'd been through this multiple times. And I think for me, it always helped to just try and distract myself and try and understand that it might have worked. And it's a lot easier said than done, but for me, distraction was absolutely key. So yeah, that's the way I chose to look at it, and hopefully that will help you too. So this question, again, I got quite a lot, and I kind of want to just clear this up because I think people think that I didn't go to Greece because I'd gone off the clinic or anything like that. So this question is, you were the reason that I started using Dr. George in Greece for my IVF cycle. Why did you not continue and pursue your cycle with him? So like I say, I absolutely love Dr. George. So Dr. George is from ARC IVF in Greece. I love him. He is 100% the reason that we have had such success with this cycle, and I will say that for the rest of my life. Although we didn't go with him, he is the reason that I had the vaginal microbiome test. He is the reason that we had the DNA fragmentation test, and he is the reason that we ended up under Dr. Ramsey. If it wasn't for Dr. George, I really do not believe that this would have worked, because he was the one that led us to all the testing, which answered so many questions before we went into this cycle. We didn't use him purely because IVF got reinstated on the NHS where I live. We didn't think that we would qualify. We were planning to go to Greece. Obviously, I had campaigned for it to be reinstated, and it was because of my campaign that happened. And I did not believe that I would qualify because we had had the 2 cycles previously. And then their policy was that if you'd had 2 cycles of private IVF, you could have your 3rd on the NHS. And we toyed with not using the NHS cycle. We really did toy with just going, do you know what, sod it, we've done all this work with Dr. George, we trust him, let's go. And then there was just that voice, that voice of reason just saying, no, look, you worked really hard to get this and to get this on the NHS. If we can have that 3rd go and not have to pay anything, and if it doesn't work, we still have that money to then go and have that 4th cycle. We didn't have that money in the end, as we'd paid for all the testing, but this did end up being what would have been our last fresh cycle. But it was never because we didn't want to use Dr. George. We really did. We were really looking forward to going to Greece, and I think, you know, if this hadn't worked and we could have got the funds together, we would have most definitely gone to Greece. I absolutely love Dr. George. There is absolutely nothing that stopped us from going there other than the fact that we qualified on the NHS, and in my opinion, after working so hard to get it reinstated on the NHS, I feel like we'd have been a little bit stupid not to use that cycle. So yeah, and obviously we're really glad we did, but yeah, I absolutely love him, and I think he is worth every penny. So yeah, that's why. Did you have any symptoms in your 2-week wait? So again, this question I have been asked quite a lot. I always say no. And the reason I say no is because I did, but they were all progesterone, and I truly believe that they were all progesterone. I do not believe that I had any symptoms before we tested. The day that we tested, I would have been 4 weeks and 2 days pregnant. Far too early to get any symptoms. And I think, you know, some people do, but most people haven't even missed their period yet. So getting proper pregnancy symptoms, I think, is really unlikely at that stage. However, I was feeling extremely tired, and I was a bit nauseous here and there were just random things. But for me, it was mainly cramping and leg aches and being extremely emotional. And to me, what I get before having a period, like, I was completely and utterly convinced my period was coming. And even text my friend and said, look, I know the difference, and I know when, I feel like I know my body well enough to know when my period is coming. Obviously I don't. But the symptoms are really similar. So no, I really struggle when people say, oh, well, you know, I had this symptom, this symptom, this symptom, because I really do think it is the progesterone. And so that is one reason I kind of always say, like, just disregard the symptoms, because they truly mean nothing. And like I say, in a normal pregnancy, you're not even 4 weeks pregnant. So it's really difficult. It is really, really difficult. But I truly believe that 99.9% of people do not get any symptoms, and it is all progesterone. My actual pregnancy symptoms didn't really start until significantly later. I must have been about 9 weeks when I started getting proper symptoms other than tiredness and backache. So yeah, I really don't think there's much waiting on that at all. So please, 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 if you can help it, do not symptom spot, because it is all a load of crap, in my personal humble opinion. Was this clinic different? Did they use information from your previous 2 cycles to learn what did and didn't work? Yes and no. So this, like I say, was an NHS cycle, so we were limited as to what we could do. A lot of, whenever you go through kind of an NHS cycle, you are limited as to how much they will fund. Like, there are certain things that the NHS just point blank won't fund. Some CCGs do allow you to pay separately and pay for certain things that may help to improve your chances. Other CCGs don't. So when we first had our consultation with our new clinic, which was obviously NHS funded, we aren't like other CCGs. Some CCGs kind of do IVF in their own hospitals. Where I live, that isn't the case, and it's outsourced to IVF clinics, and the NHS just pay for it. So you could go to a clinic and have an NHS cycle with them and only have access to a certain amount of things, but then if you were to go privately, there's like a whole other room just full of other goodies that you could add on to your cycle. So we were limited. When we first had our consultation, I'll be really honest, I got off that call and I was in tears, and it was in that moment that we were like, do you know what, fuck this, sorry, excuse my French, let's just go abroad. And it was only a couple of days later when we spoke to them again, I'd kind of sent an email and just said, look, I'm really worried because I don't feel like anybody had taken into consideration the other 2 cycles that we've had. And like, the consultation was so basic, and it felt like the very, very first consultation that we'd had. And they were just kind of telling us how IVF worked and what happens and what they would do. And I kind of left that call and I was just, I hadn't said anything during the call because I was quite shocked, and I was a bit like, okay, is this really happening? Like, have they really not even looked at our records? And anyway, I spoke to them a few days later and they hadn't been given the notes. So they hadn't been given all of the information about us. They'd just kind of been given our referral. So they didn't know that we'd had the 2 cycles before. They knew nothing about our embryo quality and things like that. So they couldn't change it massively. What they could do was kind of increase my dose, again, like my progesterone, like things like that. So we were limited somewhat as to what we could do, but yes, in the end they did absolutely take it into consideration, and we were very aware that there were certain things that we couldn't do, but there were certain things that we could. So they did take it into consideration. It wasn't like just going in and doing it all again as though it was the first time, because that would have been absolutely pointless. And like I say, I'm not wholly convinced that it would have worked if we hadn't have done all the testing, etc., privately and separately with Dr. Ramsey and the DNA fragmentation, etc. I still don't believe it would have worked. So I do think all the private testing that we did was the reason that it worked somewhat, as well as certain things that the clinics did, of course, but I don't believe it was solely down to the clinic as to why it worked. So yeah, I do think if you can afford to get tests done privately, then maybe do, just to better your chances. But I appreciate that that is a privilege that not everybody has, and we had to save for an awful long time to be able to do what we did. So yeah, I do get that. But yeah, in short, yes, they did take it into consideration. Another question I thought was quite interesting. So have you PGT tested the embryos, and what is your opinion on that? So no, we didn't do any testing on our embryos. There's multiple different types of testing that you can do. When we spoke to the clinic in Spain, again, I've done a video previously on when we spoke to a clinic in Greece and Spain. The clinic in Spain were quite pushy on doing this and wanted us to do these tests. And we said no, and the reason being is obviously, so this, if you don't know, it's like a kind of genetic testing on the embryos. I'm not opposed to it. You know, if somebody said to me, oh, we're going to do PGT or PGA testing, then, you know, by all means, it's your choice, knock yourself out. For us personally, it wasn't something that we were ready to consider. The reason being, I think I've read quite a lot on it about how it can actually damage the embryos, and some embryos that would have perhaps corrected themselves in the womb end up being discarded. And to me, I just didn't think it was worth it at this stage. I think obviously our embryo quality wasn't very good, and so, you know, things that we could do to help the embryo quality and to improve that was really key. But I didn't feel like that was the answer at this point. I felt like there were other things we could have done first, like the karyotyping. We could have, you know, like I say, we did the DNA fragmentation test. There were different ways and different things we could look at before we started kind of fiddling with the embryos, which I didn't really want to do, because like I say, I think sometimes embryos that could have been perfectly good do end up being discarded, and I just don't think there's enough research into it. I think it's one of those that's still a little bit murky, and there's kind of conflicting evidence on it. So for me, it just wasn't right. But I think, like I say, you do you, and you do what's best for you. It might have been something that we considered later down the line, but at this stage it wasn't something we felt we needed to do or wanted to do. Did you have bloods done throughout the cycle? I had no bloods done at all. Yes, so my clinic again were quite hot on that, and every time I went for a scan I would also have a blood test to have a look at where I was. So for example, we thought I was going to trigger, they did a blood test, everything looked good on the scan, but then that afternoon they rang me and said, no, please don't trigger, we want you to carry on with your medication for another 2 days. So my previous clinic, however, I didn't have a blood test every time at all. I only had a blood test I think once, because I wasn't responding as well. So I don't know if it's standard practice. I can't say whether or not, you know, all clinics do. I would assume that they don't, but yes, this clinic, I had really regular blood tests the whole way through. Did you show any signs of OHSS? So OHSS is effectively over hyperstimulation, and it's where you have been obviously doing IVF. People with PCOS are more likely to have this, but it's where you're basically producing too many eggs, or you can have, or just a lot of eggs, but it can cause quite a lot of complications, and it can be life-threatening if it's serious. Because I have PCOS, clinics have always been really kind of cautious of that, which is one of the reasons that I was having the blood test quite regularly, and they, you know, this time, like I say, with the amount of eggs that I was producing, they were kind of very aware of the fact that I was a higher risk. My PCOS, however, is only borderline. You wouldn't believe it with the beard that I grow and everything else, and how irregular my cycles are, but my PCOS is only just a diagnosis, really. My AMH isn't that high. It's higher than normal, but it's not high. So I wasn't a major risk, but I was still a risk. I did show a symptom. I had my own concerns towards the end, because my ovaries literally felt like they were two massive cricket balls in my stomach, and I could feel them when I walked, and I was so uncomfortable by the end of it. And yes, so by the end I had got a small amount of fluid that had leaked into my womb, and once I'd had my egg collection, they were like, if that is still there when you come back for transfer, we won't be able to transfer, and it will be a freeze all. But they did say that quite often the progesterone will kind of level it out, and it did. And when I went for transfer, the liquid had gone, the fluid even on my womb had gone. So yeah, it leveled itself out. So I was kind of borderline. I nearly got it, but I didn't get it, which I was very grateful for. So yeah, kind of. How did Marco feel throughout the cycle? Marco was fine. He, of course, like when I'd go for scans and things like that, like he would worry, like he couldn't come. He wasn't allowed into a lot of my scans, so we kind of just thought it was pointless that he came. He did obviously the egg collection and the transfer, but yeah, he didn't for my scans, because it was just pointless. He'd have just been waiting outside. He wasn't even allowed to wait in the waiting room. So, and it was cold. So yeah, he was obviously quite anxious when I was at my appointments, and he was waiting for me to ring him. And I think Marco is generally much more laid back than I am. Like, he just focuses on every day, like the now rather than what could happen in 2 weeks. So for him, it was just, he was just trying to stay kind of cool and calm and collected, and just accept that there was nothing more that we could do, and it was either going to work or it wasn't. And he was really good, to be honest, the whole way through. He has always been such a good support for me, and has kind of definitely been the level-headed one out of the two of us. And like I say, our focus really was getting frozen embryos. And so that was his, once we'd got that confirmation that we'd got 4 in the freezer, he was like, look, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, we can go again. And he kind of had that mindset the whole way through, which I actually really appreciate, because as much as it's not always my mindset, he really does help to keep me super calm. I have done a video before about the male side of infertility, but to be honest, I don't really, Marco's not really, he doesn't really like being in front of the camera, so I keep him off here as much as I can really. But he will never tell you what I think people want to hear, which is one reason I don't, when people kind of say, oh, will you get him on the podcast or things like that, like 9 times out of 10 the answer is no. Because he is never going to be that man that comes on and tells you how hard this has been for him. Like, he just isn't, he isn't like that. Like I say, he is so relaxed about it. And he, as much as obviously when it didn't work and when we were getting bad news after bad news, he took it just as hard as me. He would pick himself up a lot quicker, and he found it a lot easier. He is such a positive person, which really pisses some people off, I know, but he would always see the positive and would always be, do you know what, if our life is like this, then so be it. And if it's just me and you, well, I'm completely fine with that. Like, a child is a bonus to him. And as much as he obviously really wanted to be a dad and really wants this more than anything, and I'm so glad he gets to experience that, at the same time, he was always, if it is me and you, we will be okay, and we will do this and we will do that, and kind of got me quite excited for a life just the two of us. And he's really good at that, so he will never be that male voice that I think people want. But he was absolutely my voice of reason and my rock, and kept me so calm throughout the whole thing, until the end of the 2-week wait. But he's great. He's always been so great throughout this, so I am incredibly grateful to have that man as my husband, 150%. I do not know how on earth I got so lucky and how I deserve him. I really don't. But he was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Okay, so I think I have answered the most popular questions, the most common questions that came through. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. Like I say, I have done so many IVF videos in the past, so if there's anything specific that you were looking for, whether that's DNA fragmentation, things that we were kind of looking for within the clinics, just updates on our other cycles, whatever, I hope that you can find them looking back. I really appreciate you watching this video. I really appreciate you sticking around and staying for the content going forward. If you haven't already, please do make sure that you have subscribed to my channel. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'll be back soon. I'm not going to promise you a date, but I will be back soon, hopefully Sunday, for another video. So like I say, do make sure that you hit the subscribe button, and if you don't already, please do head over and follow me on Instagram at amber.itso, and I will see you soon. But thank you so much for watching, and take care.